listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
A big hello to all of you out there and welcome along to another episode of my Straight to Video podcast. As always, I'm your host Rob Lane, and as it's Halloween month, I'm thrilled to bring you a chat with another horror movie legend. Today's guest is writer, director, producer, and outright icon in the movie special effects world, Robert Kurtzman. Where I actually start in the list of films Robert has created groundbreaking effects and monsters for is tough, but here's a few. Let's throw Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness on the list, along with From Beyond, several Nightmare on Elm Street movies, Predator, the awesome Bubba Otep, and even Dances with Wolves. To bring things right up to date though, Robert has worked on Dr. Sleep, Gerald's Game, and The Haunting of Hill House. In the late 80s, he teamed up with Greg Nicotero and Howard Berger to form the special effects powerhouse studio that was KMB FX Group. Imagine the ILM of horror movies. And to add to that, let's just mention the fact that he wrote the story for the all-time classic film From Dusk Till Dawn, and would hire a then unknown screenwriter named Quentin Tarantino to write the film's screenplay. This job would allow the budding movie maker to quit his job at the video store, but where he went after that I'm not quite sure. And of course I'm adding a serious wink to the end of that comment. It was really cool to hook up with Robert to talk about some of his amazing journey, and I'm sure you're gonna get a kick out of it. This Straight to Video podcast is proudly presented to you in association with Affinity Photo, an incredible piece of photo editing software which I've been using for graphic design the past couple of years. It's used to create the podcast episode artwork you see each week, and it's an extremely affordable alternative to other programs on the market. So please, if you can, check them out at affinity.serif.com. Alright, let's dive in. To learn more about the films Robert has worked on and see examples of his incredible effects, then head on over to robertkurtzmanmufx.com. But right now, please enjoy my straight to video chat with Robert Kurtzman.
Yeah, I love the fact that you guys have that video store. That's cool.
Yeah, a bit of a passion project which we've got going off. So it's been there for just over, I think it's about 14, 15 months now we've been open. Yeah, it's going good. People's response to it is fantastic. A proper time capsule which we've tried to create. So yeah, it's really, really cool.
Yeah, we don't have anything like that close to us.
There's a few out on the West Coast, I think.
Yeah, there's a couple. There's one in Atlanta, but it's not geared to genre. But like I said, it's just not close. No matter what, you have to drive like hours, even if we're in the city to get there.
But yeah, hopefully next time you can make it to the UK. I'd love to have you over and we could figure something out. That'd be fantastic.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You're out in Atlanta these days.
We are, but since the strike, we've been, this is our studio in Ohio, our home area. And since the strikes have been going on, our family's all up here. So we spend most of our time up here.
Ohio, your hometown, Crestline, I believe. What kind of place is that, or how does it compare now to when you were growing up during the 70s?
Kind of the same. Downtown's actually pretty cute little area. It's evolving, but it's a small town. There's only like 3,500, 3,800 people in the town, and we're surrounded by farms and railroads. It's a small railroad town, so we have trains going through. In fact, you'll probably hear one while we're on the thing because it's right behind us here.
Bit of a contrast to Hollywood then in the 80s.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I'm glad to be out of there.
Where did you see some of your early movies growing up as a kid? Because I did a little bit of snooping around. Was there a cinema called the Crest Theatre, which I believe closed in 1978?
There was. It might have been open when I was really young, but by the time I could go to movies, it had closed down. And then eventually they tore it down. But I do have a banner. It's at home. It's one of the original lobby banners from the Crest. And it was like, forget the movies that were on there. It's a Western and something else, but it's really old. Where I normally would go is the Cineplex, which would be, 15 minutes away. They had the cinemas. They had 2 or 3 cinemas there growing up. And then, in the summertime, it was always a drive-in.
That's on my bucket list. I've got family in the States, which I used to visit in the summers and stuff like that, but I've never been to a drive-in theater. It's always something I want to check off the list.
Oh, yeah. No, we spent a lot of time at the drive-in growing up.
Excellent. So any films stick out? Because I know you was big on Jaws and Alien having a big impact on you, but anything else that really jumps out?
I mean, when I was younger, my parents never took me to see scary movies. It was always, Disney films and, Apple Dumpling Gang or something, type of thing. And once I got into my teenage years, I started seeking out stuff. But, other than that, it was watching Universal monster movies and giant monster movies like King Kong and Godzilla and all that kind of stuff that would play on TV either Friday night on our what we used to have as late night horror host shows, and then Saturday and Sunday they'd have the weekend movies, and they usually had something like that, a sci-fi movie or say Day the Earth Stood Still or those kind of films. And then once I got into my teens and VHS came out and you were able to get your own recorders, then it was nuts. Then I started seeking out everything I wasn't allowed to watch when I was younger. The Texas Chainsaws and all of those type of films. I Spit on Your Grave.
All the stuff which was banned over here, we never got to see that forever.
Exactly. What do they call the video nasties?
That's right, yeah. I think I saw Evil Dead, and then after that, everything was kind of pulled from the shelves until we didn't get Texas Chainsaw Massacre again until like the late 90s, which is like unreal to think.
Wow. Somebody could have cleaned up over there like the underground drug dealer of video cassettes.
For sure. Have you got two brothers? Is that right? Are they older or younger? Or?
Yeah, I do. No, they're both younger than me.
All right. So you could introduce them into films.
Yeah, pretty much. They were more into some other things, but, I would always know what was coming on from searching out the TV guide. And there would be a Chris Lee movie on. It was like, hey, Chris Lee movie's on tonight. And if mom and dad were having a get together downstairs, they always made us stay upstairs. We weren't allowed downstairs if they were having an adult drinking party or something, with their friends. So we would stay upstairs and we'd always watch a movie like King Kong, Wizard of Oz, because those kind of came out during the holidays too. And then there was always like 1 Million Years BC or Fantastic Voyage or any of those sci-fi movies. But a lot of what I grew up on were the really B AIP movies and a lot of public domain titles that would play on local channels, Saturday afternoons or whatever. So you'd get The Giant Claw or Them, even though Them's a studio picture, but you know what I mean? Those kind of B horror films.
Did you always have like that fascination of seeing something on screen? Was that bug always there right from the beginning? As in like, I want to know how they created that.
Yeah, pretty much. Obviously, when I was younger, I wasn't thinking about it. But once I got into just before junior high, I would gravitate toward the magazines I'd find at the newsstand, and it would be Famous Monsters and things like that. So at that point, I started really looking at the people making the movies as well, reading the articles on how they made them. And, you had Cinefantastique and you had Cinemagic was another one that was out that always gave away the behind the scenes secrets of how they made things and did things.
They were the DVD extras back in the day. You had to find that stuff in the magazines.
Yeah, exactly. There was none of that. So that's the only way you could find out was reading these magazines. Completely different now, obviously, with the internet. Like, it was hard to even find out information on filmmakers and monster makers at that point.
Yeah, even if it gave you some instructions of like, oh, this is done with foam latex, where do you get foam latex from? There's that problem after.
Right, exactly. I had no clue, yeah. Well, back then, you would either call Dick Smith or Savini or something and go, you're all nervous. Yes, Mr. Smith, or is this Tom?
Was that an actual thing then?
That I called?
You actually did that?
I called Tom once.
No way.
When I was in high school. Yeah. Most of the makeup effects artists did reach out to the people they followed. And, most of the time you get some information.
You could find the phone number.
Well, back then we had a phone book. So you could find things through the phone books.
A little bit of detective work and you're away.
Yeah, a little bit. Luckily, there's not a lot of Tom Savini's in Pittsburgh, but I know that some guys reached out to Rick Baker in the same way, and they had to look through the phone book to see if they could find them. 100 Rick Bakers.
What question did you ask Tom Savini?
Probably about how to get into doing makeup effects, and where could I go to learn it and whatever, that kind of stuff.
Did you ever remind him about that later in your career?
I think I've told him once. We just saw him like a couple weeks ago, so we've run into him a lot at the conventions and stuff.
Were there any outlets through school that you could learn anything to do with the film industry, or was it just like art class to expand on your ideas? Was there anyone you could talk to say, hey, how do I get into something like this?
Nothing, not at all. And to be honest, I didn't even consider getting into it until my high school years because I didn't know what to do or where to go. I went to art school instead to become a commercial artist. And after a year, I dropped out of art school and worked the summer and then just moved to LA. it wasn't what I wanted to do at art school. So I decided just go to LA and, figure it out there. So I went out there and went to a makeup school, which at that time there was really a very limited special effects course. It was mostly beauty makeup and corrective makeup, laying beards and all that kind of stuff. There was a bunch of different makeup effects labs out there. You had Rick Baker and Greg Canham and Dave Miller and various other people. And then people that kind of got into it just maybe a year ahead of when I got into it that were starting their own studios after several years of apprenticing and working at different people's places. So yeah, that was, the early 80s. It was like 1984 when I moved out there.
Wasn't you like 19 at the time? We have to remind ourselves, like, at that time, like, no internet. You couldn't search for information as readily. It's like, how do you even go about looking for somewhere to live?
Yeah, we didn't know anywhere in Los Angeles. And of course, in my parents' minds, everywhere in Los Angeles is dangerous unless it's Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
So I had this little apartment that was just on the edge of Beverly Hills. And it was like a bedroom, kitchen. Everything was in one room. It was very, very small. So I stayed in there 4 or 5 months, did my school 12-week program there. And then I ran into people. Like the one thing when you're in LA, you hear about stuff like, hey, they need a bunch of extras for this movie. And you're like, oh, okay, I've never been on a movie set. So you go be an extra one day. And I met a guy on set who ended up being Steven Spielberg's assistant and then Harrison Ford's assistant for a while. And he was working at Amblin. And so we moved in together.
Wow.
The guy's name's Steve Palmy. Yeah. So we decided, well, hey, we don't want to, spend all the money on, let's just get a place where we can pool our money and get a decent little apartment to live in. So he would work at Amblin and I would work at John Beekler's and other shops around town when I was first starting. So anyway, that was just, it was just networking in LA, and then you start finding friends and then opportunities arise.
Was you always comfortable in that situation, kind of like being a duck out of water? Was you happy to like approach people and things like that?
I'm pretty shy. I'm pretty quiet. It depends on the crowd I'm around. But when you start working with makeup effects people, you discover everybody is into the same thing and grew up on the same films. So it's a real easy second hand there,
Have you ever crossed paths with Gregor Punchatz?
Yeah, Greg. I worked with Greg on From Beyond.
Awesome.
He was on From Beyond. Yeah, he worked at Mark Shostrom's with us. And then he got into visual effects.
Yeah.
Him and Aaron Sims were good friends who grew up together. And Aaron's a big concept designer now.
Fantastic.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, I met him a couple of years. We were doing some shows out in California and with a band I was playing in at the time. And Gregor came to the show and was talking. And I was speaking to his wife. She's like, oh, he works in films. And I was like, oh, what films does he work in? He's like, oh, he worked in one of the Fright Night films. So straight away, I was like, holy shit. Then I came back and like IMDb'd him and he's worked on like Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and RoboCop. I'm like, if you'd have told me that when I was there, I'd have been like fanboying off the scale.
Yeah, a lot of guys kind of got into the computer end of things after a while. They saw the writing on the wall and they segued into that. So I know Gregor does a lot of commercial work and film work now, but it's on the visual effects end.
Yeah, I think during lockdown, because his dad was into all the Doom stuff and all that kind of thing, he started resculpting some of the things on that. So he went back right to old school stuff during lockdown, which was cool to see. Are you much of a music fan? Because like as the mid to late 80s, they were a hotbed of excitement out in Hollywood. How much of that did you get to see and experience?
Not much. I'd go to some of the clubs there with the guys from the studio and, we'd go down to the Troubadour or whatever, but was never really big into that. I'm a big AC/DC fan, so there's a couple times we'd all jump in a limo, take it down to wherever AC/DC was playing. And I had a friend who was kind of connected with the bands, like he knew the Ramones and did their videos and stuff. So met and hung out with Lemmy from Motorhead at his place, and then we'd get backstage passes and stuff. And for a while there, I never went to the Metallica shows, but Kirk Hammett used to hang out at the studio at K&B all the time. And he would come by, and then we always had tickets to go into the shows, I never went, but I know a lot of the guys would drive down and then have backstage passes and everything. It's just a lot of that's too loud for me,
Says the guy who loves AC/DC.
Yeah, I'll see an AC/DC concert, and they're pretty damn loud. So now that I'm getting older, I don't know. It's probably damaging to my ears.
The effects industry, was it quite tight-knit back then, as in like everyone knows everyone hangs out, or was it competitive to land a gig on a movie?
It was once we started our own business and actually had our own effects shop, which was, K&B. It was a little different because now you're competing against the people that you used to work for, shops, studios. But yeah, it's pretty tight-knit. Like every Halloween, someone had a big Halloween party and everybody dressed up and was there. And it's pretty much the who's who of makeup effects people. And because you juggled from shop to shop when you first started as a freelance artist, before we had our own studio, we'd spend 5 or 6 weeks or even a year or two at one of the studios. And then when they didn't have work anymore, you're calling up somebody else's studio. Hey, do you need help? And you're just juggling back and forth from different studios. So, and then at that point, you meet everybody. You work with everyone.
You mentioned Halloween then. Halloween's just around the corner. Was there any crazy 80s Halloween parties in Hollywood? And
oh, yeah.
Was it work from work or seeing who could outdo each other for costumes, or did you kind of scale it down?
No. Usually they went big. I didn't really go big. A couple of times I'd make myself up as a lost boy or something. And then the next day regretting that you had prosthetics glued to your face because you're stuck to your pillow and you drank till 3 a.m. And then we'd go to a place called Tommy's Burgers in LA. It's still out there.
Yeah, I've not heard of that.
Yeah, it's Tommy's, but it's up right across from the Anheuser-Busch brewery. We'd always get chili cheeseburgers and then cheese fries with chili all over them. And then, of course, you're drunk at 3 a.m. and it's open all night. Then you go back and you wake up at 9 a.m. the next day and you're feel like shit because your stomach's messed up.
Can't figure out what's the latex and what's the remnants of the hot dogs and all that kind of thing on your face.
Yeah, so I only did that a few times and then wised up and I was like, if I did anything, it would just be makeup out of the kit, highlight and shadows.
Fair play. Your early list of movie credits, it reads like I'm looking at a video store rental shelf in the 80s. Predator, Evil Dead 2, one of my favorites, Invaders from Mars, Night of the Creeps from Beyond. Did it feel at that time like you were in the middle of a horror tornado and part of something really special in horror cinema? Or was it just going from one job and just happy to be working? Or did it feel like something was really happening?
I don't think I realized till well into that's what was going on. It was obviously a renaissance going on. It started with certain movies and then all the low budget movie companies got into it. They had to have rubber monsters and stuff in their movies and try to outdo the gross out effects and everything. But at that time, I was just, I was just a kid who was happy that I got hired at different places. And to be honest, I was learning everything back then too. So I was learning from the other artists. They'd have artists working at Stan Winston's who had been making molds for years, and I'm the new mold maker. And of course, you're learning from these veteran artists. So I think I was more into that and just trying to build my portfolio at that time.
You mentioned as a kid, you've been reading Famous Monsters and I guess later Fangoria. And now I guess you're working on films where Fangoria was coming out to the sets that you were working on. Was that cool for you? Do you remember maybe buying copies you were featured in?
Oh, yeah. It was very exciting when I was working at Mark Shostrom's or one of the other shows. And there's a picture of you in there applying a makeup or whatever. And it was exciting because, it was something I grew up on, It was even more exciting because I was pretty much a film director geek, who would follow film directors. I would follow all the, 70s guys from Tobe Hooper to George Romero and Dario Argento and John Carpenter, Spielberg and everything. So then years later, once we started building our company up, then getting to work with all of those people, except for George. I didn't work with George, but Greg and Howard had. But everybody else, we pretty much hit all those guys in the 80s. All the guys I grew up on their movies in the 70s, we were now working with. So that was exciting.
That must have felt like a real kind of a badge for you. It's I'm doing a good job at this now and things moving on. It must have been really, really cool to get to that position.
It's always good to get yelled at by the people you admire. No.
Brilliant. Working on Evil Dead 2, how familiar was you with the original? And how was Evil Dead 2 pitched to you at the time? Effectively a remake of the first movie, but I guess with no real constraints as to the chaos and the gore.
Well, the first one came out, at 1980?
82, 81, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere around there. So we were familiar with it because we had watched it. And we were actually really excited when Mark told us that was the secret project that he was going to be doing. When he got that project, I was in Italy on From Beyond doing the effects for Mark on that. Then I came back and it was Evil Dead time. They had already started the life cast process on Evil Dead 2. No, that was really exciting. And it's still one of my favorite films to have worked on, that and Army of Darkness, just because it was Sam and it was kind of small crews. even on Army of Darkness, compared to the scope of the movie, it was kind of a smaller band of artists working together. So Evil Dead 2 was especially like that. We were in this really small town in North Carolina and there was nothing to do. So all we did was party with the crew every weekend.
How long was you out there for?
3 months.
3 months?
An entire summer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you ever been back since?
No, I haven't been to that town since Wadesboro. What's funny now is that movie was shot over 3 months, I think close to $3.5 million or somewhere in that range to make it. And they shot for 3 months. Now a $3.5 million movie you're shooting in 18 days.
Yeah. I'd love to chat briefly about Dusk Till Dawn, which you wrote the story for. Easily one of my favourite films on so many levels, and one of the biggest holy shit moments I've ever seen on screen that totally caught me off guard. It wasn't until I saw that movie on TV. Somehow, magically, I'd avoided that spoiler all that time, which would be unheard of these days. Was there anything in particular that inspired that story? I mean, whilst the film came out in 1996, I think you wrote it in 88. Was there anything that inspired this amazing mashup of gangsters and vampires?
Well, my goal was to, first off, direct my first feature, so that's why I came up with it. But it was looking at other movies that isolated their characters in a setting and laid siege to them. So I'm a big Assault on Precinct 13 fan. And then you have Night of the Living Dead. And I love movies like Race with the Devil and things like that. You know what I mean? They all kind of merged together. And then the title actually came from an all-night drive-in that I went to when I was younger. It was From Dusk Till Dawn, all-night drive-in. So we would go watch 5 movies in a row. You know, they do a horror movie weekend. So you're watching movies like Night of the Living Dead and Zombie and, you know, and then they'd always have some shitty movie like Blood Beach or something in there. And do you remember, this is a movie you might know. It might have been retitled over here, but one of the films I saw at the drive-in on an all-night binge was a movie called The Beast in the Cellar.
I don't think I've ever seen it, but I do know the title.
Right. That was playing there. And it played a couple of times on television over here when I was a kid. But it was a British film that was really interesting movie. It was kind of anti-war movie, really. I don't know if you know the storyline, but yeah. But it was creepy. The 2 old ladies, the father had locked the brother in the basement before World War II, so he wouldn't go to war. So he hates soldiers. And once he digs his way out, he's like killing all these soldiers. And they can't figure out what's going on. But anyway, that was one of the movies I saw at the drive-in. But that was the inspiration, trying to work up a low-budget movie that I could shoot on basically one location for the most part. And, you know, it was conceived to do for a couple $1 million originally. And then it kind of ballooned to a much bigger film.
There's a really cool pilot trailer online, which I think you made in 1991.
Mm-hmm.
Was that like way before you brought Tarantino in to work on the screenplay?
Oh, no. Tarantino was kind of on board. I wrote the story, and then my friend John Esposito, who wrote Stephen King's Graveyard Shift, was going to write the script. And he went away to work on Graveyard Shift because it suddenly went into production. And so me and him decided to find a writer. And Quentin was recommended to us. At that time, he had worked in a video store, him and Roger Avery. And he sent sample scripts to us to read. It was Natural Born Killers, True Romance, and Reservoir Dogs.
Whatever happened to them?
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, we hired him. We made a deal with him. He wanted $1,500 so he could quit his job at the store and start writing full time. And he needed effects for Reservoir Dogs, even though it hadn't gotten off the ground yet. So that was kind of the deal. Well, I'll do the effects in Reservoir Dogs. You write this thing. And then it took like 8 years to get the movie off the ground after that. And a lot of that had to do with studios, money people not getting it when they read it. They were like, wait, it's a crime movie. And then suddenly turns into a vampire film. They were like, they didn't get it. So it kind of didn't have the standard 3-act structure. So they poo-pooed it for a long time until Robert became interested. And he was like hitting it hot, you know, after El Mariachi and Desperado. So he was kind of the hot new guy and it just made sense. Now maybe we can get it going. And we did. And it was bigger.
Yeah. Was it always the plan to have such a shift halfway through the film and totally curveball the audience? Because the pilot trailer pretty much lays it out that it is vampire related, but was it always the plan just to start it with no hint of that whatsoever?
Yes. It even made it more, because in the short that I had written, it just got the bullet points down. We didn't have the hotel sequence. So I think that made it even more so. Once that got added in the beginning, it also drug it out, but it was interesting enough what was going on with the characters and the geckos that you weren't anticipating. Let's get to the horror. You know, you didn't even know it was a horror film. So I think that worked. Originally, I had them getting the brothers are broke down on the road and they do the whole, hey, we need a hand. And of course, the preacher and his kids pull over to help him out. And then they get ambushed and kidnapped.
What was your first impression of Quentin when you met him? Did you actually meet him in the video shop?
No. If I remember correctly, I had to go pick him up at his house. He lived at his mom's. And I picked him up and drove. I would do this when we were working on the script. We'd hang out at the studio at K&B Effects. So I'd pick him up in Burbank, and we were all the way in Chatsworth. So it was like hour drive, 45-minute drive, depending on traffic. He would just hang out at the studio with us. And of course, he's into all the same movies we were into, even more so. And so it just turned into like, a bunch of kids having fun, talking movies, all the time.
Do you have fond memories of actually working on the film once it got into production and to the shooting stages? Was that a surreal experience, having created these characters and see everything come to life, but also be manning like the special effects side of it?
I had such a struggle getting the movie made for 10 years. And then the fact I wanted to direct it originally and then had to step back. So there was that. And yes, I had to get over that. But once the film started coming together and Robert's ideas, especially the look of the titty twister changing, because he really added that Aztec feel to it. Originally, it was just a sleazy biker bar, south of the border. But that and him putting that cast together and then being on set watching every day, watching that go on was really cool. But the one cool thing was once it got into the titty twister itself, we were on a sound stage. They had built the whole thing and it was up on risers and everything, so we could puppeteer from under the floor if we had to. It was basically just watching those actors do their thing was really cool. And the other thing was, you'd think that it would be kind of cool to be on set with naked girls all day long. You know what I mean? But it kind of isn't.
It doesn't get boring though, does it?
No, it never gets boring on a Robert Rodriguez movie, that's for sure. Because you're always, you're going and going, and he's getting as many shots as he can. So you're very busy. Same like on a Sam Raimi movie. But it was so hot on the set because they could only run the sound so long. And by the time they turn the air conditioner on, they're shutting it back off because Robert's ready for another shot. So that's the thing. Everybody's just disgustingly hot and sweaty. So there is no oh, this is really cool being on set with all these people and half the girls are naked. And you're everybody was just can't wait to get home at the end of the day and shower off.
Where did you first see the finished film? Do you remember?
I think it was at the premiere at the Cinerama Dome.
Do you remember the reaction from the crowd when the film shifted?
Yeah, but I knew it was coming. But yeah, we were just so in awe of how well it turned out. We were just, hey man, this is a good movie. It's really energetic and violent and at times funny, and it kind of had everything, so it worked for us. I saw it with John Esposito. He's also co-producer on it. We just had a really good time. And then it opened at the theaters and it did pretty good. It had a great opening weekend and whatever, but then it kind of started building after that, in the home video market and then Blu-ray and DVD. And then everybody seems to have found it even years later. And I know it's really popular because there's nowhere I go where somebody doesn't mention that they love that movie. But initially, like I said, it did okay, but it didn't do gangbusters at the box office. I think it made maybe 40 million at the box office, but it only cost 17. So they really made their money after the theatrical.
Yeah. It's wonderful though. I love it to this day. It's fantastic. I wanted to briefly touch on your work with Robert Englund and the Freddy Krueger character. I believe you originally worked on Part 3, Dream Warriors, before later working with Howard Berger on Dream Child and then New Nightmare. But you personally got to do Robert's makeup at Comic Cons and I think he was in London in 2014 at one of the Showmasters events and then on the Goldbergs TV show. The makeup in all the films has its own style. How did you approach your take, and do you have a personal favourite from the other movies?
I did, and I kind of based it off kind of a mix between 2 and more 3.
Yeah, I got 3 vibes from it.
Yeah, only because, I was more of a fan of the Kevin Yeager makeups. Of course, the first one on its own is something really unique and never seen before, but the Kevin Yeager ones I kind of responded to a little more. I thought the sculptures are really tight and nice and the design, but then later on, they kind of get too loose, where it's just painted red and flesh, it's the holes, and there was no detail to them. So I just try to base it off the ones I like, which were Kevin's.
Was that your first time actually working directly with Robert?
I met Robert on Nightmare 3. And then I've known him ever since and very good friends. But I did all the makeup applications for his movie 976 Evil that he directed. And I was working for Kevin Yeager at the time. And Kevin, threw me on set to handle all of Stephen Jeffries' makeups. And then after that, I'd run into him on different shows. I can't even think of all of them. And then eventually, Robert did Wishmaster for me.
How is he in the makeup? Well, how did you find him in the makeup chair? Does he go quiet, or is he constantly engaging and talking?
He's great. It's great hearing because he knows everybody has stories about everything. So it's great to listen to all that, but you have to get him quiet in order to work around his mouth, to glue edges down. Otherwise, 2.5-hour makeup takes 3 hours to do,
You've worked out in Hollywood for close to 20 years before returning to Ohio. Since that time, the industry, much like the music industry, the film industry has changed so much. We had the introduction of so much CGI, streaming services becoming the big movie juggernauts. That's a whole nother podcast with everything that's been going off. But you've managed to stay on top of all that, working on things like Haunting of Hill House, Fear Street, amongst many others. How do you personally find movie making these days? I guess there are always new challenges. Does it still hold that creative magic from when you started, or is it a totally different headspace these days?
A little bit of a different headspace, but it depends on the filmmakers and the producers, and if they make it a welcoming, creative process, Sometimes you're on shows that it's just a mess, and they don't know what the hell they're doing, and from day one, you're behind, and you know what I mean? It's what we call a shit show. And we've been on a few of those for sure, but
yeah,
when you do hit something special, it's something special, and Haunting was one of those things. Dr. Sleep was one of those. All of Mike's stuff that we've done with Mike felt special when we were making them.
I love Gerald's Game. That was fantastic.
Yeah, it turned out really cool. When I work with Don Coscarelli, it's kind of the same thing. Like Bubba Hotep's a small movie and John Dies at the End's a small movie, but they're special movies, and they will stand the test of time. And so there's different movies throughout my career that I wish I'd never worked on. But working on those films, actually, you still learn something. You learn what not to do. You learn watching other people screw up, what you shouldn't do as a filmmaker, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I always feel like now films, there's so many fingers in pies, so many people, before it gets to the stage where you become involved, so many people have been involved in it. And use the term back in the day, everything was kind of flying by the seat of its pants, everybody pulling together. And what came out at the end of it was just like some real magic back then. I always reference stuff like, you see the behind the scenes of things like Star Wars. That film could have fell apart at any moment. They were just really all hands on deck pulling it together. I don't know. I feel some of that has been lost from what I could tell these days. There's so many corporate decisions behind everything before it gets to the stage of you guys getting on board.
Well, the biggest thing now, I think, is CG has become a crutch. And the biggest thing is that we used to have more prep time to create what we do. And we also, in that prep time, used to have some R&D time. Research and development, we could actually come up with new ideas and how to do things. And now everything's so quick, especially with television. They give you 2 weeks to try to pull shit out of your ass. And you're like, I don't even have an actor yet. And the money, the same thing. They always want it cheaper, faster. You get one of three things. Cheaper, you can get it faster, you can get it better, it's a pick two. But anyway, I think that's the difference in that it's become easy for them to go, well, if we can't figure out how to do it practically and you guys don't have the time to fabricate things, then guess what? It's going to be a visual effect.
Yeah. I read something which I'd thought years ago about The Thing, prequel they made to Thing. I know you've worked with John Carpenter. You're a big John Carpenter fan. I remember watching that film, and I remember watching the behind-the-scenes thing, and they kept saying, we love how we've done so much practical effects in this film. And I remember watching it, thinking, I don't remember much practical effects. It all seemed like really CGI, but apparently all that was just overkill after the fact.
Yeah, I know. ADI, they put out a bunch of their behind-the-scenes studio footage of all the stuff they built for that and the tests they did. And yeah, it's a real shame because you only see limited amounts of their stuff in the movie, and it's usually a tight shot or one puppet shot or whatever. The other thing is once, CGI can create things like, it can crawl up the wall now and, run through the room and stuff. I kind of want to go back. I go, what would that movie look like if they'd done it like the original? And they don't rely on all that. They rely on what they don't see and bits and pieces of really cool puppet stuff. I know they can make things crawl on the ceiling now and everything, but it's expected and I don't really care. And it doesn't make it that much scarier either.
Robert, I'm going to give you one last question and I'll put you on the spot. I want you to time travel a little to a Friday night in the late 80s or early 90s. You head into the video store. It doesn't have to be Quentin Tarantino's. What movie soundtrack do you have on the Walkman? And what 3 tapes are you going to rent for the weekend? If you like, they can be movies of yours which you think someone new to the genre or even a newfound love of the 80s might enjoy.
Oh, God, back then. Because I used to go into the video store and leave with like 6 tapes for the weekend.
Right.
And I used to copy them because I had 2 decks, but copy at that EP speed where you could put like 6 movies on a tape, but then like a few months later, you're watching them again and the quality is just horrible. So, God, soundtracks wise, well, I was a geek. I collected all the soundtrack records back then. So I had all the John Williams soundtracks and John Carpenter soundtracks and Goblin soundtracks. And I had pretty much all of that stuff. I mostly had them on vinyl, though.
Right.
I should have had more on the Walkmans, but I really liked the big vinyl kind of movie posters on the records. So movie-wise back then, God, it was a lot of that was what I hadn't seen in theaters and what my parents wouldn't let me see. So definitely The Hills Have Eyes, first one, and probably Piranha.
Nice.
Humanoids from the Deep. Those are the movies I gravitated toward, Something that would have nudity and gore.
You're asking the shop clerk, which one has got nudity and gore? Lay it on me.
Just point right to that. Actually, I was the guy telling them what to get in at the store, at the local place. They just asked me, like, so what horror films should we have on the shelf? I was reading all the magazines all the time. So I'm like, wow, I haven't seen this. You got to get this in, And occasionally then, the more highbrow kind of Wicker Mans, those kind of shows.
Well, Robert, I appreciate you taking some time to chat with me and for Marcy hooking this up. It's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me. And we look forward to hooking up over on your end of the pond. Say bye, Mars.
Bye.
Say bye.
You enjoy your evening, mate. Thank you ever so much. Appreciate it.
All right, man. Have a good weekend.
Sending a huge thank you to Robert Kurtzman for joining me on today's podcast. Such a thrill to chat to someone so heavily involved in what I consider the greatest time for horror movies. And it's really cool to see him so active to this day and pushing boundaries with his creations. And I look forward to whatever he does next. And of course, fingers crossed that maybe next time he comes to the UK that he might be able to pay a visit to our 80s video shop. Until then though, keep up to date with everything at robertkurtzmanmufx.com. Speaking of the straight-to-video 80s video shop in Alfreton, Derbyshire, which is just 10 minutes from junction 28 of the M1, we have a special Halloween horror day coming up on Saturday, the 21st of October. Iconic horror artist Graham Humphries will be returning to sell and sign prints of his amazing artwork as well as his new book, Nightmare on One Sheet. You can pre-order your copy to be signed by Graham on the day from www.80svideoshop.co.uk. Then on Monday the 30th of October, we'll once again be teaming up with the Loft Movie Theatre for another Halloween screening. This time it's going to be The Return of the Living Dead at the Savoy Cinema in Nottingham. Tickets are on sale now and I really hope some of you can make it along. So as we cruise through October and getting close to Halloween, that's all for this episode, but I'll be back next Friday. So until then, always be kind, please rewind and unwind, and I'll speak to you all real soon.